Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and welcome to the first half of American history. I have been teaching this class for over 40 years, probably, and I learn something new every time. That's the way history is. Each time you come back to it, there's a different aspect or maybe some point that you hadn't thought about before. And that's why we find history to be a passion, and it is my passion. So we're going to be talking about several things, and I want to just try to bring in this video commentary some things to light that you probably did not think about previously. If this is your first college history class, you will find it much different than what you took in high school. High school history does not delve very deeply into the problems. It is mainly what Benjamin Franklin calls civic history. It is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves that we use in nation building. And to be quite frank with you, it's the story of great white men and how they conquered the planet, the Indians, and made America. That you don't find very much discussion on women in history or Native Americans or African Americans or Chinese Americans or Japanese Americans, or Latin Americans. All these people played a vital role in the establishment of the great experiment, as America was called. And yet we tend to ignore, maybe not write out, but ignore all of the pieces. Now, you understand the nature of history. It may also be a little bit different than you think it is. You think there is a history of the United States. There are many histories. To give you an example, Herodotus, the first historian, the Greek historian of record, if he and four of his contemporaries were to walk out on a battlefield, same general story, time frame, context, everything, and they collected artifacts and they brought them back and they wrote about that history, it would have been a different one from the other. They would not have written exactly the same details because one historian's emphasis might have been on the men who were fighting, might have been on one side or the other, it might have been on the weaponry, it might have been on the weather, who knows. But it would have brought out different aspects. And so let me encourage you when you read history, don't just mark someone off as wrong, but examine what they have to say and look at the different aspects and prospects. It also is involved in the historical philosophy in some sense of the historian doing the writing. So as you look through these things, kind of, you have to put on your thinking cap and you have to be a little bit discerning. Don't just swallow the first gulpy that comes down the pike, but you need to ask questions. You need to investigate. You need to look at other people's opinions that they've written about and find your own common ground somewhere in that process. I write books and articles, and many times I'm in the same boat. I may have an opinion on something that is way out, from the current. But that's how history progresses. You write books, you present papers at seminars, and then they come back and they critique your paper, your thinking, and then from that, history kind of incrementally moves forward. I have a very unusual opportunity this coming October. I'll be going to Michigan. I live in South Carolina. I'll be going, North Carolina, I'm sorry. Spent 60 years in South Carolina, so it's kind of in my mind. But I'll be going to Michigan to present a paper on the verse of scripture in the Psalms. What is man that thou art mindful of him, or the Son of Man that thou considereth him? And AI, which is really kind of an interesting subject because it kind of crosses. I'm very much uh, within fields. I'm into many fields. I'm in I have degrees in theology and church history and regular history. I have a degree in writing. I have cognates to teach theology and church history and religious studies. So that kind of crosses all my T's on, if you will. So it makes me the person to deliver this paper. But I'm sure, and this is quite a scary task because at 68 years old, I have preached many a sermon, thousands of sermons. I have never spoken before a group of my history peers. And so I move with some fear and trepidation about that. But that's how history progresses. I'm sure those guys will critique and send back notes. And I mean, it's a lot of things, hermeneutics and the Hebrew language and all those things are all involved in this. And so, you can make one little side step and you get a pretty good feedback. But from that feedback, then of course I grow, they grow, we move forward together. So that's the nature of history. As we look at the first part of American history, you say, well, how does that relate to me today? Well, it should relate to you because the current move in America and in the federal government is toward a Christian nationalism that has much to do with these beginning stories. And that is one area that I'm well versed in. I have a book out on that subject on Project 2025 and its dangers to American democracy. I have a very guided opinion on that. And so um, we need to understand what this early American start was like. I mean, the religion specifically, and you will note that it's very different than what we consider Christianity today. The evangelicals have gone after more after this political move, and it's kind of, in my mind, as a pastor, abandoning the scriptural things of Christ. In fact, some of them have said that Christ is too woke to follow. So we just take it into our own hands and bring on Armageddon. That's the day we live in. So this course should really involve you and should make you interested in learning more history. When you leave here, my dream and my hope would be that you would have as great a passion for history when you leave as I do. I know I will not pass with some of you, because you had a bad experience in high school. High schools, to their detriment, will put any kind of warm body in the teaching chair for history. Anybody can teach history, they think, the janitor, the coach, whoever. But I was blessed in high school to have two men that were history majors, and they really planted in me the important things of the contents. I put up a lot of things. I put up a tape. I put up, sometimes I do a newsletter, whatever, to try to acquaint you with subjects that maybe you don't think about. And so in this tape, I would like to talk a little bit about the Native Americans. I don't call them Indians. I kind of refrain. I taught Native American history for a number of years for Columbia College. I refrain from calling them Indians if I can. Sometimes I have it; it'll creep in, because the Indian name was the label that Columbus stuck on them. Now you think about how you like labels. Maybe you have ADHD or ADD, and you got that label stuck on you in junior high school and taking Ritalin and all those things. And you can't get it off. I mean, it's in your medical records. You can't erase it. Well, that's kind of how the term Indian came about. And now today, the big ruckus is that we just take their images and their names and put them on ball teams and whatever. And there's a big argument about that. That's not really fair. That is capitalizing on a group of people that can't help it and can't stop them. We took their land and all this other stuff. I saw the other day in the immigrant problem a sign that I liked. It said, "How can you be illegal when you stole the land?" And we did exactly do that. We're going to talk about that, the mindset of, especially the English, toward unused property and why they just took land from the natives. But I think I mentioned somewhere else, maybe in the announcement video, when Columbus arrived in North America. Now we talk about Columbus' discovery of America. Columbus did not discover, in the strictest sense, America. There were Russians here on the West Coast. There were Vikings on the North Coast, maybe down as far as what is continental U.S. today, but we do know in Canada. And the Native Americans, where did they come from? You and I, as Christians, we accept the Adam and Eve story in the first five books of Genesis. And while we're on that, let me make this statement. The Bible is not a academic source. So if you're asked on your papers to have five academic sources, the Bible is not one. The Bible is an authoritative primary document, old document, maybe not primary even, because especially the first five books of Genesis, which tradition says was written by Moses many, many years after the event. Moses was not there at the creation. He was not there at the flood. So he's writing as a secondary author. So it's a secondary source, but it is a great primary source, and I'm not discounting belief in the Bible, but as Christians, we accept the Bible by faith, especially the first five books of Moses. And I am very much interested in those books, and I study them. I actually have written some things on the Bible and science, and all those are big deals these days. I mean, especially with this current administration trying to get rid of science. There's been a battle between the Bible and science since the 1800s with Darwin, and I have a lot to say about that in other places, and I won't bore you with that. But Native Americans, we think there were about 10 million in the Americas in 1492. There were probably 338 different tribes and as many languages and as many religions. Now, I teach a Southwestern history class for Grand Canyon that is quite interesting because in looking at Navajo and Hopi and the other tribes of the Comanche and the Apache, one of the interesting things that is encouraging to Bible believers is that they carry in their heritage. And remember, they are Native Americans here. They didn't just evolve here, as they would have you to believe. They came over the Bering Strait or across the water and landed in this continent of America. And then from there, they spread out. We think they probably went over the land bridge during the Ice Age at the Bering Strait and following animals and hunters and gatherers. One thing we have proven and that we do know is that since we have done the Human Genome Project, that Native Americans carry genetic similarities to the Euro-Asians in Asia and Europe. So we do know they're cousins, and so it's nothing to be alarmed about with that. We know that they have, uh, they're here, but they're part of the original. The other thing that I find interesting as far as faith is concerned is that in their stories, their oral traditions, you realize one of the problems with studying Native Americans is they don't have written history, did not have a written language, many of them, until the 1800s. In fact, the Cherokee were the first to write down the language and have a written language, and they published a newspaper in the Cherokee language, but most of it is oral history. That's how we got the first five books of Moses passed down verbally from generation to generation because there was no writing and no language until about the time we get to Moses. And so this was orally story, like your grandmother and grandfather sitting around the fire telling stories of their childhood. Basically, that's how we get this information. And so it's not verifiable. In order for something to be verifiable, you have to have eyewitnesses and be able to cross-examine them and be able to challenge and look at and study. So, as I said, we take that by faith and we accept that as a believer. But it's interesting that there are evidences in history. The point I make as a Christian, as an apologist, as a historian, as a writer of biblical truth, is that if Christianity and the Bible are to be believable and to be accepted, then they have to meet the standards of intelligence, basically. My PhD I'm working on is at Liberty University in Lynchburg, and I have had the privilege of taking several classes under Dr. Habermas, who's one of the best known apologists for the Christian faith in the world, and particularly in the resurrection of Jesus. And his main study is on the Shroud of Turin. He is one of the men that the Vatican has approved to actually touch and experiment with and work on this. And they have proven that this shroud, which has a image of a crucified male, about 33 years old, with spear marks and blood, and his face in this cloth, and we have no idea how that was done because it's irradiated into the cloth. Now you can think of that what you will. It's not painted, not woven. It is from the inside out. It's. I like to say when Jesus got up from the dead, the glory of his godliness, his godlikeness, shone through and left this image. They have proven that it's from the time frame there is pieces of grain in the material that come from the time of Jesus, and it meets all the other marks. Now, do we need that to believe? No. We accept by faith. But by the same token, these things, the Catholic Church is big, and many of you may be Catholic. I'm not shooting at the Catholics, please. They keep a lot of relics and artifacts, right? They've got St. Francis's bones are on display in the Vatican right now, which I think is a little perverse, but pieces of the cross and Mary's slipper and all this stuff. We don't have to have that to believe. We believe because God said so in His Word, but sometimes it's good for us to have a few uh, artifacts around that confirm those things to us. So early American Native Americans were here when Columbus came, and you ought to go back and read Columbus's journal. In fact, I'll try to post that for you to read if you'd like to. The things that he said about Native Americans became the standard acceptance and belief for generations. Some of that stuff we still accept, and is wrong. Columbus, to be perfectly honest, was not a nice person. They literally converted the natives at the end of the sword to Christianity, and then worked them to death in the gold and silver mines. In fact, the Spanish main emphasis in the New World was gold and silver. They didn't care about the people. In fact, it was so bad that by the middle of 1500s, they had worked to death almost every Native American in South America. And so they send a letter back to the Queen. What do we do now? And she says, well, go to the Bahamas and get those people went there, and they'd already worked them to death. And she said, okay, go to Africa. And so they start bringing Africans over to South America. And in fact, one of the things that's interesting is we make, a huge deal out of slavery, and I'm anti-slavery. I'm not any of that. But we never had as many Native Americans, I mean, African Americans in North America as they did in South America, like Brazil and Mexico. In fact, they're in like Brazil, their peoples mainly are an interracial mix of African American, our Africans and Spanish and natives, and almost from Mexico south. There are very few purebred, pure, ethnically clear Native Americans. Most of them have blood of different races in them, and we all do. I mean, that's not a big deal. So to kind of give you some perspective, from the time of 1492 to 1889, when the Indian Wars ended in North America, we had gone from 10 million Native Americans, we think, to less than 300,000. Uh, you can call if you don't call that genocide, I'd like to understand why not. We actually wiped out the Native Americans, and there's a long story. We'll see that as we go through this history. We'll talk about the different things that happen with that. But I just want you to be thinking about Native Americans here and their contact with Columbus, and then of course they're the three main groups that are going to colonize the Americas: the Spanish, and remember their emphasis is on gold and silver, not on training these people anything. When they finally give Mexico its freedom in the early 1800s, they had not prepared them for any kind of self-government. And so in the interim, America takes Texas and California, all those states in the Northwest become American properties under James K. Polk, who was a follower of Andrew Jackson. And other than Thomas Jefferson, added more land to the American landmass than anybody else. Thomas Jefferson, of course, in the Louisiana Purchase is the number one. James K. Polk is number two. So then the French came, and you got to remember that Columbus, when he landed in the Americas, thought he was in India. That's why he called these people Indians. That's why he put this label on them. And he came back three other times to the Americas, one time as governor, and died thinking he's still in India. They can't envision this huge landmass. Now, one thing that I will put to bed that you learned in the fourth grade that was wrong: Columbus and his men sailing to America were not afraid that they were going to sail off the end of the earth because they thought the earth was square. That is not true. By Columbus's time, they already realized that the earth was round. You could watch a ship coming into port, see the mast first, and then before the ship ever got there, you could see the top of the ship, which realized that it was on an arc. So they knew it was round. That's where he came up with the idea, well, maybe we can get to the West Indies by sailing west if the earth is round. I think in the introduction, I may have talked to you about coffee and sugar and how we got that. I always call it Starbucks, how Starbucks discovered America from the Crusades, 11, 1200s, when Europeans first went to the Holy Land to take the land back from the Seljuk Turks, the Arabs. They encountered coffee for the first time and sugar. And so they fell in love with that because the Arabs love their coffee and they have coffee shops. So Starbucks is not a new idea. It happened in the Arab world centuries and centuries ago. So they started importing it back to England or Europe. And then the door shuts in 1200 and Saladin takes the Holy Land and closes the door. No more coffee for you, the coffee Nazi. So they start traveling overland to Constantinople, which was long and arduous and expensive until 1535, 45, when the Turks took Constantinople and it fell and closed the door unless we sail around the tip of Africa, up through the Mediterranean, over to Asia, which was long and dangerous. And we didn't have good ships and we didn't have good sailing until Henry the Navigator invented the caravel, which allowed us to have sails that we had control of the ship. You had to stay way off course. And being close to the continent of Africa would usually dash you on the rocks. And so Columbus, this is his motivation. 45 years from the door closing for the overland route, he comes up with this plan to go to India by sailing to the west, and there was no fear of sailing off the end of the earth. Now, he did lie to his soldiers about the dates he put in the book so they wouldn't be so scared of how much mileage they did. But when they landed, they thought they were in India. And then they start looking for a way around this big clump of dirt we call North and South America. And the French go down the St. Lawrence River thinking that may lead them around. They have no idea how big America is. I mean, it is huge and they have no idea. It could be islands, it could be anything. And so the French get into fur trading with the Indians. And they're the only one of the English, French, and Spanish that take the time to learn the Native American habits and the idea of reciprocity in gift giving. You always give gifts to each other and whatever. And so they get into that's how France became a center of fashion is fur coats, fur hats, beaver hats, which were the rave of Europe in the 17, 1800s, coming from the French fur trade in the New World. And of course, then the English come late to the game. We'll talk about why that was. And they bring their families. And so it sets up a whole different dynamic with the Indians, protecting their family, trying to keep them from being hurt. So that's basically in a nutshell. Now, there's some Dutch people, they settled New York. They later sell New York to the British. So man, they bought Manhattan for $11.83 in beads, and it's worth probably 10 million per square inch now. But then they sold to the British and left, and so America ends up taking, or the British take that, which becomes a part of America. In summation, there's a lot of things that I'm not here just to repeat your reading. I mean, that's not you're to read your materials and to digest them and think about them. I'm here to kind of give you some other perspectives to give you an idea of what we don't get to talk about many times in history. Things that I find interesting. You may find them boring as I'll get out, but I think the untold stories are the things that make history worth our time. So as you go through your materials this week, read and highlight everything, things of importance, your discussions. Be sure you bring your reading into that discussion. That's what you're going to be graded on. A discussion board is not an opportunity for you to knock your brain out of gear and let your mouth idle. Just write whatever you want. But that is not a discussion. Take the materials you're reading, show me that you read them and that you analyze them. That's what we're doing in history. History writing is very different from English writing. We're using evidence, almost like that's why history is such a great foundation for law, because you're learning to take the evidence from primary sources and also from secondary sources and use them to prove the points you want to make. So keep that in mind. And then, of course, your quiz is another thing. I am available, more than happy to talk to you. If you need to talk to me personally, we can set up a Zoom a meeting and we can spend time doing that. But I'm here to help you. I'm here to make you successful. I'm not here to hurt you. And I do want to leave you with a passion for history. There's never been a time in American history when it is more vital for you to know that history than right now. Not what Fox News tells you it is, or CNN, or any of these other news people. They're not telling you the real history. They're telling you the biased version that they want you to accept in this world that we live in. But be able to read it for yourself. As Martin Luther told Christians in 1500s, learn to read the Bible for yourself. Let me encourage you, learn to read history for yourself. Thank you till next time. Bye.